Perfect. So guys, welcome. Thank you for being here. And it is a pleasure talking to you guys today. Now, this is a bit different than the normal presentations that we give. It will still be an hour. This presentation is really on scaling a business and beginning a business and thinking about how it is that you can build out your own businesses. And I'm going to try very hard as part of this business or this presentation to talk to you really about those things that you know aren't just rah-rah, let's feel good about ourselves, but rather are practical advice for people who are starting out. So to that end, let me just start with my normal caveats. Specifically, as you are aware, our forum is private, but our videos are public. This is going to be put on any number of public forums, so any questions you ask will be publicly available. All right, that being said, we're at about 10 people right now. I expect it to go to about 20 by the time we're done. We're recording. Let's get cracking. So I don't know how many of you are familiar with this, but I used to run a business called Access Law. When I finished Access Law, I actually did a recap. I actually do a recap for all my businesses, but because Access Law was my last successful professional business, that is to say professional service business that I sold, I kind of reconstituted this from that experience. And I really kind of chose to go over what the lessons were that I took in and internalized from that time. So some of this is a bit dated in terms of reference because I made this presentation last, and the last time I gave this was I think in 2018 when I sold. But at the same time, every point here is relevant to people starting out today. So with your permission, I'm going to get cracking right away. Always good to begin with the Mike Myers picture. Dad, what's the difference between school and life? The difference, son, is everything. School teaches you the lessons and gives you a test. Life gives you a test and you learn the lessons. That's very true. Guys, anyone who, and all of you are kind of interested, I think, in starting up your own businesses. Anyone who starts their own business in this world knows that practically, you know, you can make the best laid plans. It's like Muhammad Ali once said, everyone has a plan until I punch them in the face. And that's kind of the thing about life and business as well. You can believe whatever you want about yourself, but really until you go through the trials and tribulations of actually starting your business and running it on a day-to-day basis, you know, you're not really engaged. So my test was Access Law, and we established, as Zishan's here, and Zishan was part of that, and so were some others. But basically we established a law firm in Walmart's, and we started dealing with volume almost immediately. We functioned in a whole range of spaces, including wills, real estate. I mean, they still operate in these spaces today. And it was open 7 days a week. Most of you probably already know Access Law, but basically it was designed around making law easy and accessible for average consumers. And we largely succeeded. We had a really large firm by the end, certainly one of the largest real estate consumer-based law firms. And to that end, it was a pleasure, and I took some lessons from that. In the process, we won a whole bunch of awards, and it was really nice. I'm going to get back to that in a minute. And this is kind of what our offices look like. For those of you who aren't familiar with it, these were in Walmart's, these were in Loblaws's. This is at a time before the internet had really taken hold, although it was already really kind of partaking. We were all partaking in the internet at that time. But people were still really actively searching out physical locations for wills, for law, and everything else. And you can see this is me, younger me in 2018. And this is my business partner, Lena, in the center of the picture. And we had a bunch of different locations at the time that I sold my interest in Access Law. So all of that is to say, I built a successful, large professional service firm. What were the talking points? What are the larger ideas and scrapes that I learned along the way that can be distilled to those people who are actually seeking now to build out their own businesses? So let's go into that in some detail. Let's start firstly with the idea behind your law firm. You're going to come up with an idea, or your professional service firm or your realtor firm. It doesn't matter. They're all professional services. You have an idea, you have an award-winning idea, and the bad news is, unfortunately, so does everyone else. The truth is, ideas really don't matter. I'm always constantly amazed at all the people who are walking around this world basically making you sign NDAs on ideas. No one cares. You can come up with Facebook. It doesn't matter. No one's going to firstly see the vision that you see, and secondly, they're not going to care, or more importantly, activate on it. They just don't. They're too busy pursuing, particularly those people who are innovative, they're too busy pursuing their own deals, their own business. But anyways, everyone has their idea. The question really is not whether you have an idea. The question is, how do you activate? How do you cut through all the background noise and actually make that idea a reality? And all of you are aware of this. So the answer to that question is to be smart in what you are approaching. And we're talking about now before you even begin to build your business idea. You know, if you're starting a law firm, or if you're starting a realtor firm, or if you're starting something else, then understanding that there are two different paths to success, two obvious different paths. You can just do what the mainstream is doing and live an average life, I guess, to some degree. But the best people in professional service firms pick either a unique idea or underserviced markets. Let me give you an example as a realtor. I'm a realtor, actually. I don't practice as a realtor, but I used to practice as a realtor. And when I was starting out as a realtor, I had to figure out a way of making myself unique. And I figured out a way. I looked at a bunch of, so everyone kind of says, oh, I'm going to go into residential, oh, I'm going to go into commercial. I said, screw that. At the time, the Eden Center and Yorkdale and a bunch of other places were looking to revamp their malls, and they saw food as the epicenter, as the one way of competing against Amazon, because Amazon couldn't deliver on McDonald's at the time. And as a result, they were investing massively in their food court. But here's the thing about everyone massively investing in their food courts. If everyone massively invested in their food court, then none of the food courts look different. And so every food court was really looking the same, A&W Burger, McDonald's, God knows what. And so I came up to Cadillac Fairview and Oxford and Bentall Kennedy and a bunch of others. And I basically said, look, I can give your food courts unique advantage. And I got clients who were very small at the time, like Big Smoke Burger and Urban Herbivore and I don't know, Buster's. There was a whole bunch of them, small little guys at the time. And I basically brought them to these large landlords and I said, these guys can operationalize. And we got them contracts within these food courts, and then we operationalized these food courts. And all the time I was acting as a broker, and no one else was in the space. It was a totally underserviced market. No one was touching it. I opened up a firm called Slatewood on the basis of this. This was my first professional business that I sold that was successful. And we were able, in doing something that was unique, to ultimately have an underserviced market, which made it very easy to actually become the market leader in it. In fact, there were only two other people there, and both of them were so large that they didn't even see us coming. The other option, of course, is to find a unique idea. Now, that's a bit harder because unique ideas are harder to implement, but certainly very doable. And in the professional service space, particularly with the advent of tech, which I'll talk about later on today, very, very possible. So that's great. Those are your two options. Let's first talk about underserviced markets. So the reason underserviced markets are so important practically in the age of the internet is specifically because the return on a dollar spent is so much higher. That's the reason why underserviced markets are going to serve you well. I'll give you an example. When access law started, this is not valid today, but it was valid when we began, which I believe was in 2014 or so. Access law established four verticals. We did real estate, wills and estates, notaries, and probate. And while this isn't exactly to scale, it's largely indicative. If you bought Google ads or if you bought Facebook ads, these things are very, very misleading because they'll pump immediate volume into your firm. But you will have to take on, as a professional service firm, additional costs to service every dollar that you spend and for every lead. And as a result, because Google and Facebook and these marketplaces are near perfect marketplaces insofar as largely in great demand areas, every dollar that you spend is matched by dollar received, because there's huge demand for these critical keywords. When we advertise for something like real estate, our return on every dollar spent was significantly lower than for every dollar that we spent on probate. Why? Well, for whatever reason, first of all, there aren't a lot of lawyers who advertise in the probate space at that time. I don't know what the story is right now. I'm not in probate now. And so what we found is that every dollar that we throw into a probate law, that probate, just so you know, is what you do to a will when someone dies. It's getting the court to stamp its approval. And it's actually highly profitable because it's like a purely procedural and commoditized area of law, which your clerks can do and which you can charge like $3,500 per. And as a result, we found that we had great efficacy in every dollar spent on probate, whereas every dollar we spent on real estate, because so many people were competing for the real estate code words, we actually had far less return. And that's the reason that probate itself was, to our mind, an underserviced vertical, or if someone chooses to establish a firm, an underserviced market as a whole. And understanding that from the get-go, going into a professional service firm and saying, hey, I really, really, really want to be in this area and focus on probate. Why? Not because I love probate, but because very few people are competing in that space. It's an underserviced market. Thus, my return on marketing will be high. Thus, my competition will be low, is an obvious solution to someone who is trying to make a profitable firm. And that's simply because of the basics of supply demand. With higher demand comes a higher bid price on any of your marketing, because that's the way marketing now works. Whereas a lower demand means a lower equilibrium price and thus a lower bid price. And so you get more bang for your buck. It's just basic supply demand. Anyone who's taken economics will certainly recall this. So what about the unique idea? So that's a bit easier said than done, because in professional services, intelligence itself is becoming commoditized. So what do I mean by that? So it is the case that where once, if someone was in real estate, everyone would have their own, as a real estate lawyer, everyone would have their own forms. Now, everyone uses a single repository called Unity or Conveyancer or whatever the software is that someone is using. And similarly, if they're in probate or if they're doing wills, they're using Hull & Hull's eState software, and so on and so forth. And what's happening is more and more people are commoditizing what was a very unique professional field but 20 years ago. And because of that, it's harder and harder to stand out. Now, one way to stand out is to, of course, decommoditize your product through branding. And branding is really critically important. And I'm speaking to a bunch of people who need to hear this, because whereas you may have appreciated what I've said to date, what you probably don't appreciate is that you're going to fall subject to the same crappy branding that most professional service firms fall prey to. So if you're a lawyer and your name is Josh, I'm going to pick on you. Josh, I don't know, you're part of this group and you're currently on my screen. Just unmute yourself. Here you go. I'm going to ask you to unmute. Josh, what do you do for a living? Are you a lawyer or are you a realtor?
Lawyer.
You're a lawyer. Great. Josh, do you have a firm?
Yes.
Okay. What do you call your firm?
Josh Rosenberg Law.
There you go. I was waiting for that. Josh Rosenberg Law is the worst name for a firm that has ever existed. And please don't take that wrong. I called my firm at one point MJM Legal. I'm not trying to knock you. You are very common. You have done what everyone else does. Why is Josh Rosenberg Law the worst name in the world? It's because fundamentally, you are in no way uniquely ascribing a value to your product. You are instead uniquely ascribing a value to yourself. Consider this, Josh. When I sold Access Law, no one needed to know, because Access Law was bigger than Mark Morris. Access Law did not contain Mark Morris's name. Access Law had nothing to do with Mark Morris by the end. Access Law was simply a bunch of computer system staff developers and processes. And as a result, someone else could step into my shoes, take it over, and Access Law would remain. The purpose behind branding is to become bigger than yourself. And becoming bigger than yourself is something you should be setting up for from the get-go, because your end goal should always be to be able to sell. No one will buy Josh Rosenberg Law if Josh Rosenberg Law isn't around. You may have a client list to be sure. You can sell the client list, but at that point, you are taking apart Josh Rosenberg Law for its constituent parts, and the whole, this is a Gestalt argument, is always worth more than the sum of its parts. This is true for almost all professional services, because it's not just Josh Rosenberg that's engaging in this. In fact, when I did my study in 2014, 96% of law firms, 97% of law firms were named after individuals. And in turn, and hasn't changed much. And similarly, in real estate, if you look at the teams aren't called things like Refined Team, that's run by a buddy of mine. I like that name, so I'm picking on it. It's instead called the Mark Morris team, or whatever it is, which again is fantastic for someone's ego. From my perspective, when I named my law firm the Mark Morris Law Firm, my Jewish mother was eminently proud of me and bragged to all of her friends that Mark Morris had a law firm. But that does nothing for the person who's going to buy out my law firm. Doesn't help. So do keep in mind that one way of becoming unique is to decommoditize through branding. And branding, to be clear, is itself its own exercise. And one of the best dollars that I ever spent while at Access Law was on a branding expert. I can give you all a branding expert's name and number. The person we used was Jeremy Otto. He was marvelous. But branding experts are worth their weight in gold, because what a branding expert does is not a logo design. No one cares about a logo design. And in fact, if someone says, I can do your branding and then starts producing logos, they're not doing their job. Branding is about distilling to your essence what your value proposition is, what you are about. Delving deep into that, and from that innovative and integrative process comes an essence of who you are in your name. Apple Computer was about more than computers, right? When you look at the logo, it's clean, it's obvious. They got rid of the color. It used to be multicolored, if you remember, because this was more simple. This was more refined. Black is a more refined color. It's about functionality, design, simplicity. All of that is there in their logo. Walt Disney stands for more than just movies. Walt Disney has an ethos behind it. It's about magicality. It's about family, like all of the things that I've listed here. When we came down to Access Law, we asked ourselves, what are we about? And we said, we're not about law, we're about accessibility, affordability, convenience. And once we identified that, all of the answers as to how we needed to operate became clear. Should we be available on the weekends? Hell yes, we're about accessibility. Should we have flat pricing? Flat, easy to understand pricing? Yes, because we're not only about affordability, but about convenience. Should we be based in Walmart? And if so, should we be based in Loblaws? Of course, because convenience. And so from all of that came the decision points as to who we are and how we would actually operate our firm. Of course, when it came time to a logo, after we understood who we were then able to say, all right, our name is going to be Access, which is clearly a play on the word access, right? ACCESS. So that's what your mind goes to, which is why we chose the word. And then when we chose our logo and our brand, we chose to actually demarcate the X, just because it forces you to stop and think about the fact that access is spelt wrong, and that's where it's spelt wrong. And then that causes you to stop and think about the word access, which again speaks to our number one concern, which is accessibility. Again, with the greatest of respect to Josh and everyone else who's a professional service firm. Please don't think I'm picking on you, Josh. I just picked you randomly because I knew that you would be like the crowd, like everyone else. Nothing in Josh Rosenberg law, nothing in Mark Morris law in any way denotes any of these qualities. And so you're losing the ability to become something unique and distinctive merely by naming yourself that way. It doesn't make sense to lose that opportunity as you are starting out. Start out well, start out branded. Other businesses that are much larger than you do this, and there's a good reason for it. There's a reason Apple Computers is called Apple Computer and not Steve Jobs Company. And of course, once you do know who you are, branding yourself becomes a really exciting part of the process. I don't know, many of you may have known this, but I'm not sure. Sorry, I just read Wesley's comment. Um, so I don't know how many of you are aware of this. Many of you probably are. But one of the greatest brands of all time for a long time was FedEx. And the reason FedEx is such a great brand, if you just take a look at it, is because of the negative space. I don't know how many of you notice this, but if you take a look between the E and the X, right here, there's a white arrow in the negative space, denoting movement. And if you think about the way the English mind reads, it reads from left to right. And so that arrow is a very intentional component of their brand, because what it's saying to someone who reads left to right is we go from this place to this place, which is exactly what FedEx does. And just so you think that that's not a fluke, by the way, this is it in Arabic where they read right to left, and you'll note that the same negative space exists in that logo. Again, because they're trying to show movement. Of course, FedEx is fairly old, and there are people who have beaten them to the punch. So today, we have market leaders like Amazon, who again are denoting the arrow, signifying movement, because that's what they do. But they've made their arrow into a smile, because of course you're happy when you get your package. And of course that arrow is pointing from A to Z because they deliver everything from A to Z. So in one image, they have so distilled who they are that in one image, they are able to say, we are someone who delivers from everything from A to Z and makes you happy in the process. I can think of nothing that more defines a brand than that. That is what a branding expert does. And a branding expert is worth its weight in gold. Do not pick a logo or a design company. It is different than the branding experience. And once you know who you are, you can brand yourself. Now, I'm not trying to put, by the way, access law in the family of Amazon and FedEx, but we certainly took the lessons from it and we tried to inculcate it into our group. And I think that a large part of our success and the reason that I was able to sell and get out of my professional business was because we had branded. And I'm bringing this up because I want to show you something, the power of branding. At Access Law, we won all sorts of awards. Awards, by the way, are very easy to win in the professional service world. It's not that hard to win some of them. Some of them, I guess, are harder than others, but whatever. So these are all the awards that we won. Some of them were personal, some of them were corporate, whatever it is. But you know, the only award that mattered, like we literally were flown down to New York for the Financial Times Awards, and we made the Startup 50 3 times. I got the Lexpert Rising Star. Like, all of these things, they're all top of professional awards. They didn't generate a single dollar for me. You know what generated the dollar for me? This is what generated the dollar. And by the way, what the Law Society then preemptively shut down. And they said, these aren't real awards. And they're right, they're not real awards, by the way. The reason we won the Consumer Choice Award is because I called up the Consumer Choice Award and said, hey, you don't seem to have a category for consumer law. And then they called me up 3 months later and said, good news, we have one this year and you won. Pay us $5,000 and you can use our trademark. And it's the same thing for Top Choice Awards. But these are recognizable in the industry. Why? Because these are the brands that have made it. Unfortunately, Lexpert is not the brand that has made it. It's made it amongst ourselves. So great, wonderful accolades amongst your professional colleagues as to the fact that you've won your Lexpert Award, but it doesn't generate a single dime. Whereas when you put this on a bus stop, this generates money because they understand branding and they understand who they are. They understand their brand. And their brand is powerful. And that's what yours can be too, if you think about it. Okay, so you're still at the idea stage. We still haven't gotten beyond the idea stage yet. But obviously, one of the things that people need to understand at the idea stage is how money works, the money ecosystem, because money is very real. And the interesting thing about money is that it's highly available for some, and it's not all that available for others. By the way, this is less true than in 2018. Now we're in a monetary retraction because real estate is just kind of folding in on itself. And so there's less money available because everyone's generalized HELOCs are being shrunk. But conceptually, the way this works is that if you run a tech business, anyone will throw any money at you. And The reason, by the way, that's the case is because of how the economics of how tech businesses scale. Tech businesses scale where there is a very low upfront sunk costs, and then there's a multiply low iteration cost. This is different than the very polar opposite of the screen, which is, of course, I'll talk about it in a future slide. Professional services do have money available to them. Every single one of us has the ability to walk into a bank and get a little money. You can get something from the BDC, and the BDC will fund, a real estate purchase that's going to support a professional service firm as long as you have like a basic business plan. And traditional banks will actually also come up with professional money, which is good. And you can of course give away some equity in firms in certain ways and get friends, family, or anyone else to actually come in on that. All of that is to be sure. And you should realize that professional service firms are very, very, very fortunate to have that availability of money. I have a friend who runs a restaurant. He used to be a client when I owned Slatewood. And he runs a very large restaurant, multiple branches. You would recognize it. It competes directly with the Keg. He generated $20 million of top line revenue per year, netting about $3 million of net revenue per year from his restaurants. And when he would go to a bank, he didn't own any of the real estate. He leased it all. He would go to a bank and he'd say, "Hey, can you lend me money on the basis of these financials?" And they would say, "You want to guess what they would say to him?" With 20 million bucks and 3 million in net every year, they would say, "Sounds great. Congratulations on your success. We're not giving you a dime. Good luck to you, sir. If you want to pledge your security, if you want to pledge your house, okay, we'll give you money. But we're not touching your highfalutin restaurants worth a dime." Of course, they could say that to us professionals, but they actually have, largely at the insistence of governments, by the way, in the 70s and 80s, instituted programs where around $250,000, $300,000 lines of credits, which you have to sign personally for, are available to professional services. So you should just be aware that money, particularly if you're a law firm or have gone through professional schools, money is available. And it will be available at about 2% above prime. And then BDC can also step in if there's a hard asset or if there is some form of inventory that they can take charge over. All of those things are true. But it's equally the case that because there's a very low cost to establishing a firm, I've never really quite understood why most firms even engage in a monetary process and borrowing money at the outset. The truth is, money is very expensive at the beginning. It becomes less expensive with time. Access law was very money heavy. I mean, we built out 14 full-time locations. We had 72 full-time staff. Like we were paying past salaries. We were paying payroll. We had infrastructure. It was an expensive ordeal, to be sure. And borrowing for that was difficult, but available to us. The advantage of a professional firm, I have come to realize, particularly recently, is keeping your costs low at all costs. And your costs should be as slight as possible from the get-go. If you can't get if you don't have an office, great. If you're in your basement, even better. If your employees are contractors, tremendous. All of these things are advantageous for someone starting out. And if you start out frugally, then there really should be no need to borrow money in the first instance, unless you have the big idea and think you're going to blow it up. So let's talk about the implementation. So you have your idea, you've decided on it, you've decided on your unique vantage point, or you've decided on your uncompetitive market, whatever it may be, and then you go to your friend, you're having beers, and you say, "All right, friend, let's go ahead and let's start this business." And so you do. And generally you take a partner. Not always, but a lot of people do. And one of the interesting lessons that I took from my time at Access, and I've had partners a couple of times. I actually had a business that failed after Access Law. I was building physical mailboxes, and I took on a partner that did not work. So you may take what I have to say with a grain of salt, because I'm trying to give you advice on a good business partner. I had a really good business partner with access law. I've had some poor ones subsequently. But regardless, what I realized is that partners that have complementary skill sets to your own are the critical component to moving forward. Now, this is not my idea, but the reason that I have a jelly bean jar there is because one of the most seminal books that I've ever read in business is by James Surowiecki, and it's called The Wisdom of the Crowds. And what he says in The Wisdom of the Crowds is he says, okay, if I put down a jar of jelly beans just like this, what's the best way to guess how many jelly beans are in that jar? So the best way is, of course, you dump out the jar and count it. Let's assume that that's off the table. What's the best way of figuring it out? He said, well, I have a way that we can figure it out with almost no error. He said, if I assemble 1,000 people in a room and I ask each of them to give me a guess, and I add up all of their guesses and then divide by the number of people who gave me those guesses, then all things being equal, my guess should be largely correct. Even though individually we all don't know, collectively we do. And there's a good reason for that, by the way. If you're wondering why that works, it works because of basic statistics. Every person's guess consists of the right answer and a degree of error. So if there's 100 jelly beans in the jar, I'm going to guess 102. The right answer is 100. My degree of error is 2. With enough people guessing, degrees of error cancel themselves out. That is to say, one person guesses +2, one person guesses -2, one person guesses +3, one person guesses -3. And in aggregate, we are therefore able to distill the right amount, because if you cancel out all the errors, all you're left with is the right information. Collective intelligence is an incredibly important dynamic. The interesting thing about the jelly bean experiment that James Surowiecki notes is that if you get a bunch of architects in a room, all of whom are staring at this jelly bean jar, and do the same experiment with them versus a room of just the general public, the likelihood of the general public being more accurate than a bunch of architects is high. Why? Because architects are taught to see the world spatially in a certain way. And as a result, their errors are likely not to cancel each other out, but rather reinforce one another. In other words, the diversity of the crowd is a critical component to ultimately allowing for unbiased and more accurate information. Whereas if you have people who reintegrate and reestablish the actual error that you are yourself prone to make, then you lose the benefit of the diversity of the crowd. This is, by the way, the critical argument for having more diversity on boards, on corporate boards across and in our governments. It's because you have a diversity of opinion that will allow for cancellation of error. When I chose to open up my business, I did so with my business partner, Lena. I happen to be very good at networking. I happen to be very good at law. I mean, maybe some people would disagree with that, but I think I'm good at law. I'm good at client relations and I'm good at negotiation. Those are my core skill sets. I'm not good at operations. I'm not good at financial analysis. I suck at HR. I'm getting better at financial planning, but I wasn't very good at the time. And both Lena and I are very good head for strategy. And so quickly, Lena and I found our own niches. I found that I was able to take access law forward and network our way through and take us into different places and do whatever's necessary and deal with client relations and negotiation system, whatever it is. And Lena very quickly set about her weekly meetings in operations, financial analysis, HR, and the like. Zishan was part of us for many years. I'm sure he can attest to the fact that these are probably exactly the qualities and skill sets that both of us brought to the table. And in the process, Lena and I assisted each other. I mean, granted, we weren't 100 people in a room, but what we were two people who were able to complement each other's error points, making us more perfect and making our organization better. And Zishan says, absolutely. All right. So the next lesson I learned from the implementation is don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. Voltaire said that. The simple fact is that there are a bunch of us who are almost OCD driven. who believe that we've all gone through law school, or we've all gone through realtor school, or whatever it is. And, the thing about law school, I taught at law school last year. I taught down in Ryerson, and I was reintroduced to this again. There's a bunch of people there who want to ensure that they are producing perfect products, who want to understand precisely what it is you're saying, who want to spend an extra 5 hours polishing that sentence and making sure it's just crystalline perfect. But that's not the way the world works. In fact, if the world worked that way, nothing would get done. The truth is, when we had the idea for access law, it was in Yiddish, and I'm allowed to swear because this is, frankly, my show today. So what the hell, you're going to have to wash your ears out with soap. It was a clusterfuck when we started this. It was a total and absolute shit show. We didn't have a clue of how we were going to deal with volume. But rather than sit there and plan and decide and plan and put in place processes and procedures and write manuals, we just opened and dealt with the hell. And it was hell. Because what you're given, and this was explained to me by a Dell executive early on in 2014, what you're given at the beginning of your business is really a block of wood. A block of wood, like literally similar to a child's toy. And what you are expecting from your business is something like the statue of David. And the only thing you're given is a piece of sandpaper. And that sandpaper is your effort, your energy, and your youth. Gray hair, trust me. Don't die yet, but I have quite a few gray hairs. My wife points it out to me all the time. And all you have is your sandpaper. And your life for the first many years of your operation is merely taking your block of wood and sanding it. And sanding it and sanding it and sanding it. This is not a new process. This was actually hammered by Toyota in the 80s. It was called the Kaizen method of improvement. Toyota produced a really crappy car at first, and then they basically decided that they would improve the functions of the corporation incrementally and through slow and gradual process. And it works. You have to live through hell, but you just keep your head down and constantly sand that block. That is the only way to implement towards your end goal, which is why drive and energy is such a critical component of building any business. Yes, with age, you can better predict what's going to come in. With experience, you can better understand what the nature of the challenges that you're going to face. But there's no way when you are starting a business that you can get around the simple fact that all you have is a block of wood and sandpaper. And you need to use those tools to carve your statue. And part of the way you do that is by implementing, and this is really critical, a process for feedback as part of your business. I cannot tell you how much, when you love your business, when you put everything into your business, hearing from people that you suck is hard. It's hard. It's hard to hear, what the hell, I trusted you. Oh God, you're a firm in Walmart. We knew it would be this way. And suddenly you are not living up to your own expectations. Suddenly someone is saying something that just stabs you in the heart because you've tried so hard to implement. But that feedback is all that matters. If you want to be told you're doing a good job, I'll tell you you're doing a good job. Pay me $5. I will write you flowery letters and Google reviews out the wazoo talking about what a great job you're doing. But what you really need is to find out when things are going wrong. And you need to drill down very, very, very hard to figure out how to make sure it doesn't happen again. When we started Access Law, we immediately started measuring our feedback. And again, I think Zishan can probably speak to this. In year one, I don't know if you were with us in year one, Zishan, but you were there pretty early on. In year one, our feedback was pretty terrible. Let me tell you something. Do you know what do you know what the base level of satisfaction is in Walmart for customer service? What do you think the base expectation is in order to be passable in Walmart when selling products? Who wants to guess? Throw out a guess, guys. Anyone? What percent of your customer base has to be happy? No guesses? Come on. All right, well, I have no doubt that each of you has a number in mind, but let me tell you that actually someone did put something in. Wesley thinks 30%. Matthew thinks 50%. Another Matthew thinks 50%. In order to be even passable, Walmart has to achieve a 99.3% rate of satisfaction. 99.3. And the reason for that, by the way, is called the Bullwhip Effect. The Bullwhip Effect is the idea, it's an MBA term in operations, but what it is it's the idea that a little variation at the beginning of your process results in a huge variation down the road. Every single time someone returns a pair of underwear at Walmart, they have to go line up in the customer service, causing dissatisfaction, causing annoyance. But more importantly, once the underwear is with Walmart, Walmart then has to reverse the entire process of its operations chain to get it back on the shelf, although they're not getting underwear back on the shelf, but you understand it could be a bike or whatever it is, back on the shelf and boxed, and ultimately not creating waste. And that is a huge process with massive costs. And as a result, the critical component for Walmart is to make sure that its operations are hitting 99.5% acceptance rates. At Access Law, our satisfaction rate at the very beginning was nothing close to what it is today, which is, by the way, near 99.9%. Just go check out the reviews online. It's remarkable. But if you check out the reviews from our first year and our second year, my God, were they terrible. They were terrible, terrible. They didn't get sued, but they were terrible. And the reason is because we were a block of wood. And we hadn't refined. But what we did do that was very smart in year 1 and year 2 and year 3 and year 4 and year 5 and every year after is we asked for feedback. Not even Google-based feedback. That wasn't even really a thing back then, although it was, but no one cared. We were asking for customer feedback. We were saying, tell us about your experience. What happened? What did you like? What did you not like? What could we do better? And we were listening and we were implementing our change such that we were smoothing out our wood in the way that it needed to be smoothed. Where there were rough edges, we were sanding. We were constantly sanding. And as a result, the critical component of implementing in your business is ultimately making sure that you have your sander at the ready, but also that you know where to sand. And the only way you know where to sand is by listening to your customer base and hearing from them every single minute of the day as to what is working and what is not. And that is the only way to scale. This is the process loop. You have a product, you get feedback, you refine, and then you have your product. And that's endless, endless. It doesn't matter if you're Facebook today. They have the same iterative process. It's Kaizen. It is adopted by all great companies. And if you're setting up your new company, your new branded company, by the way, Josh, but if you're setting up your new company, your new branded company, then you should be doing so with feedback mechanisms in place. You don't want them to be public. I don't care if they're public. I don't care what people say about me online. I have a bunch of negative reviews on this one site. I've never even bothered correcting it. It happens. Like as far as I'm concerned, if you have negative reviews, so be it. But if you're worried about negative reviews online, if you think it's going to make a big difference for you, okay, then generate internal things. I run legal review right now. Many of you may have used legal review, and when someone goes ahead and does a review, we ask for internalized feedback where we ask people to rate the experience specifically so we know what's going right and what's going wrong, and we can alert people and better ourselves. We built it into the technology. That is what we do. Okay, so if I quoted Voltaire before, I'm going to quote myself. If tech companies are simply businesses that have mastered big data manipulation, then every business needs to become a tech company, because data is really everything. And in your role to implement, if you are looking to scale a business beyond your simple self, technology is going to become a necessary component of that scaling. And here are the lessons that I learned from my time at Access and subsequently building out physical products like mailboxes, which was a failed business, but I learned a lot about tech. Firstly, if possible, internalize your tech team as soon as possible. Make sure that you internalize those tech teams. As you start out, everyone and their dog is going to be telling you that they can help you. Oh, I do SEO. Oh, all you need is this. Oh, all you need is that. Well, the moment you take a bite of anything substantive and choose to invest money in technology, you are going to find that that technology needs to be improved almost instantly or has flaws. And if what you've done is you've the contractor from India that you do not know, or if you've just paid someone by the hour and they're now working somewhere else. You cannot fix technology easily. I guarantee you, if you are not savvy on technology, you will not understand what, as an example, GitHub is. You would not understand what repositories and best practices are for coding and data. You won't be able to monitor it. And really, the only way you can make sure that you keep control is by having an internal employee who ultimately works for you and is there to help you sand the paper of technology. I quickly learned that there are two different types of development. One is called waterfall and one is called agile. And internalizing your tech team allows you to do agile development over waterfall. Waterfall is, here's the goal, get me there. And then you get to that point, the water falls, and then you see the next waterfall ahead, and that's the next point we're going to lead to, there we go. As opposed to agile, which is continual improvement, bit by bit by bit, Kaizen, 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 let's keep on sanding. Agile is only possible when you actually have your team internalized, not when you are hiring someone unless you are paying huge dollars. Keep in mind that you will implement a minimal viable product. You will bring it out to market. And whatever it is you feel your finished product is when it first releases is your minimal viable product, and you'll never stop developing it because, again, agile development applies to tech. It's critical that you ensure that all proper documentation of coding is done. There are ways that coders know how to ensure that their work is kept for posterity. I mentioned one, which is GitHub, which is the standard way that people actually can see what has been done on a block of code, especially allowing more than one person to work on a block of code. It is critical that that documentation be there, because if your technology person gets struck down by a bus tomorrow, or alternatively, if you get into a dispute with your technology person, or if you don't and they ask for no more money and you are not in a position of power where you understand how your code works, then you are effectively subject to blackmail by your own firm. Critical that you ensure proper documentation of all coding is there, and know that going back is almost impossible. You simply, once you adopt a technology, cannot unadopt a technology. So be very, very careful in the path that you are actually selecting. You know, you'll learn, this is kind of granular and a bit more detailed, but you know, the lessons that you learn when you start implementing technology are critical. Like we used, at Access, we used a technology called Salesforce. Many of you may be familiar with it. We didn't use Salesforce properly, but we used it nonetheless. We used it to generate our wills. We used it for document generation of all things, which was wild. It's not what it's for, but we did it. And we came to realize exactly how important it is to do proper tech setup. You can't take shortcuts, even though it may seem easy in the short term. As an example, if this was your field, Mark Morris, if this was a single field, that's really bad. Because whilst I can use that data, I can download that data, I can't manipulate that data. Why? Well, because if I put this in as one object in technology, then I can only manipulate it as one object. Whereas if I say switch to the best and make Mark Morris a single object, 439 University an object, Toronto an object, Ontario an object, and build them out properly, well, then I can scan for all my clients in Ontario. I can scan for all my clients in Toronto. I can scan for all my clients on University. I can scan for everyone who starts with MM. Because I have different objects, I am able to manipulate my data differently. And understanding granular details like this is just one of a million pieces of data that I could probably bring up, but understanding the granular details of how your technology works is critical, because it gives you the flexibility to move forward with whatever business it is as you move forward into the future. You can't analyze non-parsed data was a big lesson that I took on in my first year. Okay, so you have your idea, pick your partner, you've gone down your unique path, you've implemented, you've put in place your technology. Let's talk about scale. Well, the first thing to note is that you have to always be monitoring the scaling costs of your business. It is the case that with professional businesses, things go like this. They jump up and down. See, when you're producing a physical product, there's a very high implementation cost. But the marginal cost of every product, that is to say the actual individual cost of every product, falls as you grow. You produce more mailboxes, your overall cost drops. And as a result, your margin increases. This is also, by the way, true for tech. Tech, by the way, has a very low starting cost. And then every instance that you're replicating has almost no cost. So every new user they add to Salesforce has almost no cost. And it scales almost linearly. But a professional service firm doesn't work that way. A professional service firm works by dribs and drabs. So what you're supposed to have is you're supposed to have this red line that kind of goes down slowly as your professional service firm builds. But actually what you have is you have these starts where things go up and down. And in Access Law's case, as an example, we got to a point where we needed an internalized bookkeeper. Then we got to a point where we needed to hire a full stack developer. Then we got to a point where we had to ultimately build out a call center backend, and so on and so forth. And at each step, our costs dramatically went up in some cases. They didn't fall. And I needed to do that in order to hit the next level of scale. And in each instance, we had to make sure that our costs were in line with our macro growth. And you should understand that particularly if you're scaling a professional service business, whether it's real estate or law or whatever it is, the scaling component is one that has to be monitored at all times, because as you grow, your costs do not necessarily fall. They fall with work and they fall with attention. And it's critical that you actually pay attention to that. It's not intuitive. It's just something that you'll see, and you'll start seeing your bottom line. You're like, why in the world am I getting bigger, but my costs are going up? What's going on? And that analysis and understanding the cost centers and the profit centers of your business are critical. And by the way, as you scale, establishing proper cost centers are really critical. I didn't really understand this when I was taking accounting in my MBA, but it's true. You really need to have individualized cost centers and understand what's driving those cost centers. The purpose being that you can do actual analysis on what is actually causing your bleed. It's very easy to just look at your employees and say, well, that's my bleed, but that's probably not your bleed exclusively, although that will probably be a big cost. It will also be any number of technologies and any number of physical locations that you may be opening up and deriving that you can run better. Cost centers are critical. And that's kind of what I showed you here in terms of what our experience was. And the last point that I'm going to make, I think it's the last point, is not to get distracted. It is so very easy when you have some measure of success to get distracted. Someone comes to you and says, hey, Mark, it's great, you've done this. Have you ever thought about this? And then you see it, you see the dollars, you see what they're talking about. But your job is to be that sandpaper on that block of wood. That block of wood, not the new block of wood, not the shiny block of wood, not the person in the bright, nice, tight dress. That's not what this is about. It's about what you've chosen to focus on and becoming the best at what you've chosen to focus on. There are people in life who will make more money than you. There are people who will shoot past you in success. There are people who will fall down. All you can do once you've gone down on your path is either decide to abandon or continue on that path. And not getting distracted is really the essence of what to do. As an example, when we started Access Law, it was very easy for us to take a look and say, you know what? Minute books are where we need to go. We have this great thing in real estate. We have this great thing in probate. We have this great thing in notaries, which are, and wills. Those are the 4 areas we decided to start out in. But, you know, minute books are a commoditized service offering, and we have a tech team and we have a stack developer, and we can just actually go ahead and implement this. Minute book came around and they implemented that process. And we could have looked at that and we could have said, hey, we could do that. But that's not what we were there to do. And you can't get distracted. You have to keep your eye on the ball and keep going. Now, having said that, and having told you to keep your eye on the ball, remember that sacred cows make the best burgers. And you can't simply keep your head down if you are heading in the wrong direction. Remember that famous story with Steve Jobs where he visited Alto Park and saw the GUI, the graphical user interface for the first time. And he said, he walked out with his team and he said, that's the future, because this will allow individuals to ultimately manipulate a computer as opposed to a computer programmer with a mouse and a click. And his top staff at the time turned to him and said, Steve, we can't do this. it's going to destroy our existing business lines that we've invested millions of dollars into. And Steve said to him, it's better that we destroy our business lines than someone else destroy our business lines for us. By the way, that's the reason that they made the iPod obsolete and a whole bunch of other technologies obsolete. They followed that mantra. I'm not telling you not to change course. I am, however, telling you that changing course is painful, it's costly, and unless there's a damn good reason for it, you don't get distracted. And if you choose to change your course, do so in the full understanding and having made a proper business analysis and decision that that's where you want to go, not because it's just the shiny new thing that you're going to do in addition to what it is that you've already been planning on. So summing up, this is what I look like at the beginning. This is what I look like now. But you'll note, above all else, there was a smile on my face, and it was a remarkably positive experience, as have all of my businesses, failures and not. I feel that every single time I do this, I get better at what I do. I feel that I have a much better understanding of the world and what makes for a good business operation. And I'm excited that all of you guys have joined me here today and that you are fundamentally also engaged in that project, because it's a real pleasure to speak to people such as yourselves. So we have like 5 minutes. Why don't you feel free to unmute yourself, ask any questions you want, but I intend to stop at 12 o'clock, which I guess is in 3 minutes. So please feel free. No, you're also dumbfounded by the brilliance here. Wes, you have something to say?
No, listen, valuable information. I don't know who else is on the call, if they're young, if they're old. You covered off most of the mistakes that I made, some that I'm still making. So, I just wanted to say thanks. That's all.
Wes, by the way, is on payroll. Every week I pay him, and he now says things like this. So that's awesome. I see my check cash. Anything else, guys? Any other questions for me? Nope. Okay. Can realtors brand like Access Law now? I believe so. I don't think that there's anything that stops you from branding like Access Law. Again, I know my friend runs the Refine team and has a beautiful brand. So yes, and Matthew, happy to discuss anything privately for sure. You're welcome to give me a call anytime. All right, guys, thank you all for coming. Thank you all for hearing this out. I know this is a bit different than what we normally do, but wonderful to see you all, and I'll post this on our forum. Take care, guys.